Good morning, I'm Dave Christie with your LaRouche Organization update for Tuesday, July 8th. Now, yesterday we had the final day of the BRICS summit in Brazil, where there were continued discussions of payment settlements between BRICS nations that would allow them to go outside the straitjacket of the London dollar, otherwise known as the petrodollar, ushered in after the takedown of the Bretton Woods system in 1971. But there was also discussions of investment platforms and including major projects. I'll come to that in just a moment. Now, otherwise, we had the announcement of tariffs, new tariffs against those BRICS nations. But backing that up were some of the geopolitical issues that we saw at least discussed in the meeting between Trump and Netanyahu, and as well as Trump allegedly saying that there would be continued arms, defensive arms to Ukraine. So all of this is interconnected with the collapse of the British imperial system that we see ongoing and the development of a new system. So I'll come to some of that, but I think I just want to point your attention to today's lead in the EIR Daily Alert, which all of you should be subscribing to, and you can find that at eir.news. But this was written by Diane Sayre, which I just will refer to it, but it's entitled, This Planet Cannot Endure Half Slave and Half Free, and she begins by noting what Helga Zepp-LaRouche had told her international associates yesterday, that the just concluded BRICS meeting in Brazil and the European NATO conference of last week, that the gulf between, or the contrast between those, could not be greater. But what she identifies in that lead is that China and Brazil, at the conclusion of the BRICS summit, that they will finally build the long-awaited 5,000-kilometer bi-oceanic corridor that will connect Brazil's Ilhéus port on the Atlantic coast to Peru's new Chancay port on the Pacific. She goes on to discuss the different elements of the historical references, particularly that this is similar to the Transcontinental Railroad, and that noted that the Brazil was one of the participants of our centennial celebration back in 1871, which had just concluded, or that we had just seen the Lincoln's initiatives around the Transcontinental Railroad. But the important part is that these are the kinds of projects that could be developed and that echo the World Land Bridge concept outlined by Lyndon and Helga Zepp-LaRouche over 3 decades ago, well, long time ago, but which is underway. We see that now in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative and this projects like this bi-oceanic corridor. Now, what Diane also, I think, importantly emphasizes is that instead of embracing this, we are mourning the deaths, these kind of projects. Instead of that, we're mourning the deaths of dozens of Americans who were swept away in Texas floods, which should have been mitigated by needed water management infrastructure. However, that was deemed not cost effective and not built. But instead, we find billions to bail out Wall Street and City of London speculators while funding genocide in Gaza and the war in Ukraine, which is certainly relevant to the present geopolitical shifts underway. Now, I think it should just be added to that the simpletons in the West, gripped by the British geopolitical thinking, will view this move around the bi-oceanic corridor as China invading the Americas and, taking over our territory. But why the hell weren't we doing this in the first place? This is exactly the kind of projects that Lincoln, Roosevelt, and other American presidents would have embraced, as well as John Quincy Adams. And again, these are what has been outlined by Lyndon LaRouche and Helga Zepp-LaRouche. All right, now to fund this requires a new economic model. So yesterday at the BRICS, Sergei Lavrov outlined that Russia introduced an initiative to create within BRICS a new investment platform that would be working with the participation of the BRICS New Development Bank. He said that this would address imbalances and mobilize resources for development. And Lavrov went on to note the efforts of the New Development Bank, the BRICS New Development Bank, and President Dilma Rousseff, who heads that organization, that their work together on that. So what he says of this new investment platform, that is, Lavrov says that it will strengthen the multilateral world order while the international system goes through fundamental transformations. This is one of the crucial tasks for BRICS and the entire international community. And then he notes that multipolarity is not a choice, but rather an objective reality which succeeds the outdated neoliberal model that actually builds on neocolonial practices. The traditional paradigm of globalization, where the predominant role is played by the so-called developed states of the West, is becoming a relic. I think that is certainly true, and it is beyond a relic. It is collapsing. He went on to say, Lavrov went on to say at the BRICS summit that the global trade and finance system is fragmenting. He said that this is the result of sanctions and the use of the dollar as a means of punishment, and that trust in the American currency is being undermined, and notes the monstrous world debt where developing countries are spending more on debt service than they invest in their development, noting that this process is out of control even in developed states, and says that the U.S. has seen a record level of sovereign debt of more than 37 trillion, and it continues to grow, and notes that the debt servicing on this is even more than their own development, what the money they're putting into their own development. So again, we had, in addition to this investment initiative outlined by Russia, there was building at this BRICS summit for the cross-border payment initiatives, which would be the means by which BRICS nations could bypass the straitjacket of the London dollar, the petrodollar system. Now, in response to this, Trump, who has referred to these moves as an attack on the dollar, he also said that in his post yesterday, which I referred to in the report yesterday, that any country aligning themselves with the anti-American policies of BRICS will be charged an additional 10% tariff. There will be no exceptions to this policy. He followed that up with a series of tariff letters addressed to 7 nations: Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, Kazakhstan, South Africa, and Laos, as well as Myanmar, threatening with more sanctions. But what is he defending? I mean, this petrodollar system, which was really an outgrowth of the London's earlier schemes around the so-called euro dollar, which began the trade in oil in denominated in dollars, which gave it a fake value. But moreover, this was London's scheme to turn the dollar into a speculative tool. This would be through this system, there were all kinds of offshore shady banks that were created, the Cayman Islands and these types of places. And that process began London's comeback as the world's dominant and financial center, that is the City of London, the square mile. But they became then the leader in foreign exchange trading, cross-border bank lending, exchange listing, financial derivatives, right? These are what Warren Buffett called the time bombs, both for the parties that deal with them, in them, and the economic system. He also referred to them as financial weapons of mass destruction, which now number in the Estimates say it's up to $2 quadrillion. And of course, to facilitate the continued leverage or capability to leverage that requires more assets, which is really part of the global, geopolitical operations that we see, whether that's the various resource grabs to keep this thing going that we see in the, Netanyahu's clean break policy, or I should say Netanyahu's carrying out of the clean break policy, which was otherwise known as the Wolfowitz Doctrine. That was the neocons and the Project for New American Century. But really what it is the Bernard Lewis plan. He was the British operative at Princeton who influenced Brzezinski. You can read more about that, but just to note, his son Michael Lewis was for nearly 40 years, just recently resigned. He ran the dirty political tricks operations out of AIPAC, targeting the congressmen and so on. So, that's what that really is. Now, in that light, we don't know much about the meeting yesterday between Trump and Netanyahu. Trump somewhat punted on the question of a two-state solution, turning it over to the genocidal psychopath to answer that, who of course said, we can't have a two-state solution and so on, and never again, and these kind of things. So that's not to be, or that should be expected from Netanyahu. It should be noted that before that meeting, Israeli President Isaac Herzog had said, "I fully support these efforts," as in the Gaza ceasefire and potential peace in Gaza. He said, "I fully support these efforts even when they involve difficult, complex, and painful decisions. The cost is not simple, but I am confident that the cabinet and the security establishment will rise to the challenge as they have until now." So we'll have more developments on that front later. Otherwise, on the geopolitical operations, Trump apparently, or did say in that same press conference, I believe, that we're going to send more weapons, that is to Ukraine. They have to be able to defend themselves. They're getting hit very hard now. He was then went on to clarify or say that these were defensive weapons primarily, but they're getting hit very, very hard. So many people are dying in that mess. So now obviously we don't know what kinds of weapons Trump is saying to Ukraine. There's been a big battle over that. Frankly, we don't have the weapons because we've given up our industrial process. But anyway, and of course they have to be diverted to Israel. So we'll see where that all goes. But I think just in light of something else that Helga stressed yesterday in the call with associates was the statements by Wang Yi on this proxy war in Ukraine. Now, he had met with Kaja Kallas, where both von der Leyen and Kajas were trying to say that China was the greatest challenge, and Kaja said that they were running cyber attacks and meddling in our democracy, enabling war. On the enabling war that is in Ukraine, Wang Yi, the foreign policy out of China, basically said that China has no interest that Russia is using what Russia is using in the Ukraine conflict. But he went on to say this: because we know perfectly well that if Russia loses in Ukraine, we will be the next target. As Helga identified yesterday, that's unprecedented language coming from a top diplomat in China. They're normally very guarded language, not taking any sides and so forth. For him to say that they will become the next target indicates how China is thinking about this. So I think in conclusion, going back to what Diane laid out in her lead, the U.S. needs to embrace these developments. This is our true heritage. This is what we fought for in the American Revolution. Give up this insanity of the defense of the U.S. dollar, because it's not a U.S. dollar. It's a tool of speculation by London and Wall Street. It is that very system which has created the geopolitical instability that we see globally, and it's time to end that system, work with the nations of the BRICS, and that is what we intend to do, especially at this weekend's conference in Berlin. Go there if you can, or tune in. Otherwise, stay tuned to the LaRouche organization for your updates on the